Hello, good afternoon, webco participants. My name is Konrad Perhauer, and I will have a pleasure to introduce you to this ENTSO-E webinar on the market designing issues. I have a pleasure to be the chairman of ENTSO-E Market Committee, and together with our colleagues from Operations Committee and together with the whole ENTSO-E community, we've been working for the past, I would say, a couple of years already on the vision of 2030 of ENTSO-E, and we would like to introduce you and share this vision with you today. So please, next slide. ENTSO-E vision is elaborated in order to meet and reconcile the objectives of the policy making in Europe, especially the targets with respect to 2030, with respect to renewables, emissions, offshore development, changing of the energy mix, flexibility of the demand supply, and also linking to different products and different energy products, and the clean energy package, which is basically also kind of laying foundation for the future. For the Green Deal. So as TSOs, we are responsible for system operation. This is our core activity. We are also co-developing the market, especially with respect to balancing market, but also we contribute to the wholesale market discussions very actively, albeit on the European level, on the regional level, and also on the national level. We believe that meeting 2030 targets and achieving all the policy goals requires very tight and intense collaboration between operations and markets. This need to be viewed as one, as parts, two parts of the same body of the same structure, and we need to work to integrate closely the system operations and market operations. This, in our view, is an achievement or a tool to enable meeting the objectives of 2030 with respect to changing the energy sector in Europe, transforming it to the 21st century, and preparing us for the Green Deal and new climate policy objectives of the community. Next slide, please. What are the drivers for which are basically the key issues which we need to deal with in order to meet the 2030 objectives? Is that we do see the following items. We do see an increase of transmission capacity across the borders, and especially we do see increased integration of the different national markets, national energy markets, into the European integrated energy market. And we believe that this is something which is very necessary in order to create one system for the whole Europe, one market with freedom of movement for goods and services, and this big, large integrated network and integrated market is able to reap the benefits of renewables, reap the benefits of integrating as much new resources as possible, and do it efficiently with respect to prices for the final consumers. We also see that the flexibilities in order to achieve this are mandatory, and these flexibilities will come not only from the high voltage network, not only from the TSO grid, but it will increasingly come also from the distributed systems, from the DSO grid, distribution system operators. They will also be increasingly important, and they will be increasingly dealing with the small resources connected to the lower voltage, and also with demand response, which is necessary to integrate increasing numbers of intermittent generation. Integration of different energy systems is another tool, which is another thing which is happening. We spoke at the morning seminar about hydrogen. We also speak about the heat. We speak about transportation. All these are parts of the same equation, and we need a seamless integration of all these vectors in order to go forward with our European integrated energy, not only electricity system. Offshore grids, power electronics, operational challenges, all these things are happening now as we speak. There are lots of dynamic changes within each of these domains, and we believe that market design and the right market design, the one which integrates operations and market into a one coherent domain, is something which can enable meeting the 2030 challenges. On the following slide, I'd like to show what are the dimensions with respect to geography and also the voltage level. You see that ENTSO-E and European TSOs are very well placed to be a facilitator, a key enabler of this energy transition, because TSOs in each and every country, they work together closely with their generators and with the DSOs, distribution system operators, which are connected to the particular national network, but also by means of ENTSO-E and by means of European cooperation, TSOs work together with in a bilateral, multilateral, and even European dimension, working together, implementing the methodologies on the level of capacity calculation regions, working together to implement the methodologies with respect to market and system operation on the level of the European interconnector, or European interconnection, obviously working together with the generators, working together with power exchanges, with distribution system operators, with the consumers, and of course with the traders, market participants. So that's why we believe that system operators, TSOs and DSOs, and also the same with not only electricity but also with other energy commodities, are the key facilitators, key enablers who can ensure that interfaces are designed right and used right, that the systems are interoperable, and that they are also compatible with each other along the different geographical axes, all being vertical or being horizontal. On the following slide, just to give you a small glimpse of today's discussions, you saw our presentation last year at the ENTSO-E conference, where we were announcing the vision. You also saw our papers, so our recommendations are more or less familiar to you. We believe that there is no one size fits all, that market design evolution in order to meet the future challenges must come from the bottom. We believe in innovation of market designs depending on the local specificities. Whatever are the needs, do you have a high level of congestion, do you have a low level of congestion, do you have lots of renewables or not so much renewables, do you have demand flexibility, how do you work with your generators, how do you work with your demand, how do you deal with congestion management and balancing, all these items. You can have different solutions across Europe to all these items. There is an overarching design, there is overarching integrated European market. We know that we have market coupling for day ahead. We know that we have intraday market coupling. We are also building integrated balancing platforms for different commodities. We are going to procure also services like reserves. We're gonna do it increasingly together, but there are different flavors to some of very specific national solutions, which do not need to be identical at this moment, because we don't have all the answers. We don't have all all the right answers for all the questions. We are still in the process of looking at the system and managing it to our best ability, to our best knowledge. Lots of answers are known, some answers are not known, some challenges appear, they come, and we need to deal with them as they come. And obviously, we need to innovate. We need to look for solutions which are going to have the best potential to be propagated throughout Europe and have the potential to actually meet our targets, meet our objectives, to bring us to 2030 and 2050 in the situation where we most likely phase out fossil fuels. We need to be able to store lots of energy from renewables to get the maximum of what the system can give us. And that's it from let's say the brief introduction. I think the context of the seminar is to make you to give you the detailed views of the different aspects of what I briefly touched upon in my very short introduction. We would like to highlight that we are presenting you ideas which we have. This is not something which is cast in stone for the moment. As I said, we are looking for the best solutions. We have lots of answers, but we don't have all the answers. We would like to interact with you, show you these ideas, show you our initial thoughts, all kinds of initiatives which we are pursuing. I would like to hear your reaction. All these options deserve much more time to discuss than the short web conference. That's why we will also be trying to come up with another seminar later, probably next year. We will also try to put some things on the paper to get our thoughts together after this last year presentation and all these discussions which happened throughout 2020, throughout this difficult 2020 year, and also the ones which will come after today's seminar. We are not questioning what we have in the clean energy package. We believe it's a good step forward. It creates lots of challenges for us, but also lots of opportunities for tightening cooperation. But yeah, we want to trigger a debate basically, and we will be glad if you participate actively together with us in this workshop. So if you could show the agenda quickly, then with that short introduction, we will move on to the parts which are going to be brought by Bruno, Gerard, and Mark Foresti, and then we will see reactions from the stakeholders, and we will have an open Q&A debate. Marco, please go ahead.
Thank you, Konrad. Just a reminder, you may have seen it in the opening slide. It's also attached in the chat. As the webinar of this morning, for the questions, we will not use the GoToWebinar chat. Please go to the Slido website. You can either type slide.do and then enter this code, eweek/2 with capitals included, or with your mobile, scan the QR code you see here. It's quite user-friendly, so type your questions there, vote for the other questions. The questions which most vote will be selected later, and we will also launch later on for live polls. So having said this, I now give the floor to Bruno for section 2.21. Bruno, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you, Marco. Good afternoon. So it's my pleasure to talk you through the first part and have a look at possible improvements in the electricity wholesale markets. So we know that whatever will happen, we will be confronted in the future with more and more variability. Variability due to more and more renewables coming into the system, demand response getting more and more active and online, storage. So this increasing variability means that consumption and production will probably need to be able to trade closer to real time. And that's closer to real time aspect will make the intraday market play a crucial role in the future. And the organization of the intraday markets in auctions and interactions with the day-ahead markets should be reconsidered. So what are the things that are possible? So evolutions are already going on, like shorter time products, finer time granularity. These things will keep on moving and moving as the future is more and more variable. So the advantage of doing that would be that those variable resources could be incentivized to participate more and more in the markets. The same goes for minimum bid sizes. If you want to attract more smaller participants, this is important as a barrier for market access. So these things are elements already on the go, and we should continue moving in that direction. A second important element is not only the product configuration, but also the marketplace itself. Are we going to continue with a lot of continuous trading, or will there be a place for more and more intraday auctions? So we see that the first intraday auctions, cross-border, I mean them, of course, are on their way. But in the future, more frequent auctions, intraday auctions, are very important because those auctions have a clear advantage. They have a good price. They have a clear price formation. And you have a unique price to refer to. We can concentrate liquidity, and moreover, they allow for an efficient pricing of transmission capacity. And finally, if we have we have good products and good functioning markets, one should also think about the function of day-ahead and intraday markets. Should they still be separated in the future, or can we create a continuum of markets in which day-ahead markets is just the beginning of a series of continuous trading windows for those products? And this could be the end goal, how intraday and day-ahead markets of today could evolve. A second element, if we looked at day-ahead, intraday, of course, the next step is what happens to the balancing time frame. So here, let's say the marketplaces as such are on their way. We are integrating and creating European balancing platforms that allow for cross-border participation of resources. But there are still some challenges remaining, of course. So apart from the energy trades in the balancing platforms, another important trade that has to take place is the procurement of reserves. This reserve procurement by TSOs, and there is a tendency of requiring those reserve purchases closer and closer to real time, which might be very beneficial for certain participants. On the other hand, there need to be also enough certainty that there will be enough reserve capacity and available for TSOs. Second element we might think of is about participation of renewables in the balancing markets. So today, there are not a lot of renewables actively participating in balancing markets. And one of the reasons might be that the support systems they have are not incentivizing them, on the contrary, to participate, for instance, in the balancing markets. So that's something we might need to look at. Of course, one may say, well, renewables support systems will fade out, of course, but they are still there, existing systems or existing support for 10 years. I think what's important also is, if you look at the energy vectors of the future, is if, let's say, hydrogen will receive support systems in the future, well, they might have a look at what happened into the electricity to see how they can create support systems that do not participate a correct functioning of the real-time markets. And finally, or another element that we might look at is if you look at the balancing energy on one side and procurement of the power on the other side, well, the question raises, could we really go to the so-called co-optimization of energy and balancing reserves as from the day-ahead market, so that market participants do not have to choose upfront to which market they will participate, and the markets will choose in an optimal way the best division between energy purchases and power purchases. All right. Third element I would like to touch upon is about transmission capacity. So in the short run, the transmission capacity, of course, is optimized during the energy markets as from the day-ahead time frame. The longer term transmission capacity, those markets, those products, those allocation has not evolved that much during the past 10 years after the electricity markets. So it might be very useful that there will be more liquid forward trades possible of transmission capacity for market participants to hedge the risk of transmission capacity. Once again, we can look at product definition. Today, we only know or mostly know yearly products, monthly products as being available. But we might think in the future also of more detailed products like week products, weekend products, peak products, off-peak products, or others. Combination of block bits, for instance, in those products, then is also a possibility. The second question is, would it be beneficial if there would be fluids, liquids, secondary market, so that positions held on forward capacity could be traded more frequently than today to adapt to changing positions or changing needs for market participants. So these are questions whether the market participants see benefit in evolution in those terms. And finally, I would say there is, could you go back one more slide, please? Yeah. And the last element I will talk to you about is about the allocation. So the question rises, we could also look at flow-based allocation of forward capacity. So today we do that in the day-ahead market, but we don't do it on the long-term transmission right. That is still border per border. And from an economic point of view, it would be very beneficial that if we allocate capacity on one border, we should look at all borders at the same time. And this is exactly what flow-based allocation is doing. Of course, it raises several questions and other consequences, but it's something that we think is at least worthwhile to further investigate if that would create some value. Thank you. And then the last element I wanted to talk to you about is, of course, about, and this is a bit more technical, is that on one hand, we have a lot of evolutions coming up in the energy markets, or everything that's already on the way here, 2025. We are talking here about possible evolutions to 2030 and beyond. But at a certain moment, we need to make sure, of course, that whatever beautiful designs you think of, it should also be realistic. And more then, it becomes challenging to do all of those optimizations. So we need to look at that too. And for instance, in today's most important optimization procedure, and tool like Euphemia, there is we feel a certain stress on those algorithms as it has more and more requirements. And we do think that there might be needed, the prioritization might be needed between the complexity of the products, the price formation, and the spatial temporal resolutions. So we might need to look at the product's definition as we are doing right now. And it appears that some products have a lot of impact on time calculations, while other products do less stress the time calculations. So all of those complex products, I think it might be very beneficial to take a look at and identify which products are essential for market participants, and which products are used frequently, and to see which products we can come up with that make a good compromise with dealing with those intertemporal constraints, but because it's mainly that that creates this complex products and the time needed to do some calculations. Another way to improve the stability and the time spent of the system is to look at another way of price formations. So today we are used to do what we say uniform pricing, but there are other markets that use that don't put that requirement on the price formation, and they use uplifts to come up with prices that are acceptable for everyone. So going from uniform pricing to non-uniform pricing would dramatically change computer time, as of course we don't need endless iterations to find a global solution that is acceptable for every trade. So the basis of those second system of non-uniform pricing with uplifts is that we don't need to look at a global solution that satisfies from the beginning every individual trade, but it goes directly to the best global outcome and then fits the so-called paradoxically accepted trades. And finally, there is also something to gain in process optimization that is clear. For instance, we could allow more time for the market, for the process, for the calculation, the optimization, and try to gain some time elsewhere in the process. So it is also a trade-off to see where we put more time and which other processes we can simplify so that they take up less time in the period of market coupling. Or one could also think in the future of combining different products, like different time products, like if you combine 15 minutes with 60-minute products, it might simplify certain calculations, or it might replace certain complex products, since those combinations could be useful for those type of assets that need them. So this was my last slide, and in a very rapid way, I gave you a few possibilities or things that are still up for discussion in the future. As already mentioned, questions and remarks through the dedicated website, and I'm very happy now to hand over the word to Gerard Dorman, who will present to you the next part of the market design evolutions. Thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you, Bruno.
Sorry, Gerard.
Yeah,
just a few words to confirm that in Slido the answers are the questions are flowing in, so that's good. Thanks for that. And we've just opened the first poll, which will be open until the end of this section 2.2. So I see you're already answering. Please continue to do so. There's a live poll tab on the top of your screen or your mobile. Thank you. Gerard, please.
Thank you, Marco. So good afternoon from Trondheim. I believe I'm in Norway. I believe I'm one of the most Nordic participants in this webinar. I'm a market design specialist at Statnett, the Norwegian TSO, and I was the convener for the Market Design 2030 project at ENTSO-E. And I will present some of the results in the following slides. Please, next. Some of the challenges have already been mentioned by Conrad, but especially regarding grid, the grid situation and congestion. We want to make very clear from the TSO side that grid development is really one of the major keys to ensure the green transition and to avoid costly structural congestion. It doesn't make sense in a way to build lots of green production in areas of the grid that are highly congested, with the result that you have to shed much of the production. On the other hand, we see that grid development is lagging behind the development of wind and solar production. We also see, because of this RES development, higher and much more volatile flows in the power system, and flows on lines that were not originally built for those flows. And as a consequence of all this, we see that there may be a need to improve the market design, or to adapt it to cope with the rapid changes in the power system. Next one, please. So we looked at several options, or many options actually, for the national and regional markets. On the left hand, we say if we have relatively limited number of congestions, it might be sufficient to do minor changes in the market design. And especially it would be necessary to fully implement the present model with well-defined bidding zones that take into account structural congestion. On the other extreme, if congestions really become we get lots of congestion that are difficult to handle, you might end up with a need for a substantial market design change, and even moving to a nodal system with a total redesign of the markets. Next. But there are also, let's say, intermediate solutions that take some of the advantages of nodal, but keep the major design of the zonal market. Some, I would say, low-hanging fruit is to include the optimization of phase shifters and internal HVDC connectors within the optimization of the market, and also the handling of topology actions, so switching in the system. Another option is to enhance the present model by defining what we have called dispatch hubs that integrate redispatch in the market coupling. And the next solution is also, next please, to stick to the zonal market in the day ahead and intraday timeframes, but have not really a nodal market, but to a much more extent take into account locational issues in the balancing markets. In the next couple of slides, I will discuss these options a little bit more in detail. It may also be that some countries obviously have different needs and different preferences, and some countries might move to, let's say, more nodal-based systems than others. If this happens, and if this is acceptable, it is at least extremely important that we ensure a good coexistence and to preserve the internal energy market within these models. Next, please. So what we call the advanced zonal market is an efficient transmission capacity management to allow to integrate more RES, more demand response storage, and flexible resources. Next. Next, please. Yeah, and one option which I would call rather low-hanging fruit, because it does not require major changes in the market design, is to include phase shifters and HVDC in the market coupling to be optimized within the market clearing solution. Initial studies have shown that there is significant market benefits to more as you introduce more HVDC in the power system, and Allegro interconnector between Belgium and Germany that will implement these optimization principles already. A more, let's say, a little bit more into the future is to try to include the topological actions, so switching in the system, which many TSOs do on a very regular basis, to include this in the market coupling by providing the flow-based market clearing with several domains instead of one. There are a lot of open issues here. This is, let's say, very interesting research that is presently conducted by RTE. Allows more flexibility into the market. Yes, please. Yeah. Another solution that is, let's say, requires some more changes to the market design is to define what we have called dispatch hubs within the existing zones. So the starting point is to have the present zonal flow-based market coupling next. But that redispatch potential that is identified and placed in separate bidding zones, or what we have called dispatch hubs. They are not really bidding zones, but they are hubs that are treated in a different way in the market clearing. Next. Then the market clearing optimization will select so-called costly remedial actions if they increase the net welfare by allowing more cross-zonal trade. So the effects, what you can obtain by redispatch, which today is done afterwards, it can already be integrated in the market clearing, which gives may give significant welfare increases. Next. And as a result, these remedial actions are implicitly paid by the market instead of afterwards by the TSO, and this is not an attempt by the TSOs to reduce the costs, because in the end it will be paid by the grid customers anyway. We did a separate study on this issue, which is available on the link that we will be able to provide. Next. Another possibility is to have a more locational-based optimization within the balancing phase. So the day-ahead and intraday markets would be kept with the present design. Next. But in the balancing phase, we would try to use more location-based balancing, which is to a larger extent will secure the system in real time. This could be in the form of a nodal optimization, which handles congestion, but you have a pricing challenge because you cannot have nodal pricing in the balancing phase while you have zonal pricing in the preceding phases. This is something to look closer at, and the probable solution is that all intra marginal activations are paid the zonal price, which is decided by the European platform, while others get paid as bid. Maybe flow-based could also be a solution, but flow-based is also less accurate than nodal optimization, and maybe too imprecise in a phase where you have only very little time left to do corrections. Next one. The other, let's say, ultimate option is to totally redesign the market, to go to a nodal market. As many of you may know, this is implemented in many jurisdictions in the US and also in New Zealand. This is based on what is called locational marginal prices, basically a separate price in each node in the grid, which reflects the cost of generation, losses, and congestion, all in one price. They do a co-optimization of energy and balancing reserves. They use central dispatch, unit-based bids that represent technical constraints. This includes a real-time market optimization with very short intervals, like 5 minutes. They have market for financial transmission rights to hedge locational price variations, and they, to some extent, use uplifts to cope with non-profitable unit commitments, or more generally, non-convex constraints, which is a bit similar of what Bruno mentioned also for the present zonal markets. However, we clearly concluded that the nodal market is not feasible nor desirable on the European scale by 2030. There are lots of reasons for this, but these are the most important ones: public and political acceptability, implementation time and costs. We see already how hard it is to implement flow-based, and this would be harder in many respects. Technical challenges to include switching, but also long hydro river systems. Liquidity and cost of hedging, although the Americans say that this is not a problem. And also open challenges with very large volumes of wind and solar and demand response. although California has very high share of solar and Texas has a high share of wind. So maybe that can be handled, but there are a lot of open challenges clearly. Next slide. So clearly the zonal market design will remain the dominating European model also in 2030. However, for some countries, congestion may be too challenging for the zonal approach. And as a result, one country or a small group of countries may choose to implement nodal-based markets. In this case, the efficient integration with the zonal markets at large is key, is very important. And in the end, this is a trade-off between the efficiency of a national market. So some national markets may basically become more efficient with the nodal design. On the other hand, you may lose efficiency of the exchanges with the overall zonal market. So this is a trade-off, but this efficient integration is very important to keep and taken into account. Next slide. So the main takeaways, the efficiency of the internal energy market and decarbonization are the overarching objectives, which are strongly supported by ENTSO-E. On the other hand, we see a number of challenges that indicate that the current market models will need to evolve or even change. The locational aspects are gaining importance. Many more resources coming up all over the grid, and that need to be taken into account, or the grid constraints leading to those, or the grids involving the grid leading to those resources may have to be taken into account. And importantly, there may be not one solution that fits all. So different countries may need different solutions. But then it is important to retain and even enhance the economic efficiency of the internal electricity market. And by that, thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Jared. Just before moving to the next section, quick update on Slido. I see we got 98 votes for this poll, which I'm now gonna close and launch the next one, which was more related to the section you just heard from Jared. I think you have two options for this question. You had three for the previous one, so feel free to reply and still include your questions in the dedicated space. So the third section of our presentation is about resource adequacy and investment signals, which we see clearly as two sides of the same coin. For TSOs, resource adequacy is of course fundamental, as we need to ensure security of supply at all times and also anticipate any scarcity risk. For market parties, this may even be the most fundamental question of market design. So how can market design ensure that market parties' investments are adequately remunerated? So which are the models that we see, the options that we see valid for 2030 to ensure resource adequacy? Well, we see essentially three models. What we call enhanced energy only market. So energy only market, but with a number of enhancements to deliver effective price signals for investments. Targeted capacity mechanism, which for instance are strategic reserve and are dedicated to temporary or specific adequacy concerns. Or a market-wide capacity mechanism, which are more to address structural adequacy concerns. This could be capacity auctions, capacity obligations, reliability options, or even some more innovative models we will see in the next slide. Now, obviously, these three options probably don't sound revolutionary to you. We see them more or less already in place in Europe, and we think that in 2030 they could still fit different contexts depending on the generation mix, on the consumption patterns, on the policy choices. But of course, they all need some improvements and adaptations. to fit the new energy mix, to fit the new technology context and the new policy objectives. So for instance, they need to be open to new capacity providers such as demand response or distributed energy resources, which maybe today are not yet participating in all markets, especially in capacity mechanism, but they will certainly need to do so in the future. Another question to be considered is whether in the capacity mechanism we could give some sort of locational investment signal. So just like we discussed earlier about including more locational elements in the energy markets as the congestions become more and more a problem for TSO and a cost for society. So it's better to try to guide the market versus towards more system efficient solution. An element could be considered whether in the capacity mechanism this could be included, and it's something, for instance, is in place outside Europe, or could also be, for instance, for a RES support schemes that we'll see later in the slides. So looking at these innovative options we've looked at, again, we're just ideas we're starting to consider, and surely there's space for further analysis and further discussion. But the first one is about capacity subscription. So the central concept here is that consumers determine and express upfront the demand for capacity during scarcity events. So the level of uninterrupted supply during scarcity events. And by aggregating those individual preferences into a demand curve, then we can match it with a supply curve built by suppliers. And then the market would clear year ahead, and there could be also other options with month ahead or multi-yearly. So creating a sort of capacity markets based on the aggregated individual preferences. And then what would happen in real time, if you see the chart on the bottom, the orange line is the consumption of consumers. So in the normal, when there is no scarcity, the consumption can raise above the red line. The red line is the contracted capacity with no problem. However, if there is a scarcity event in this chart between 16 hours and 20 hours, then the TSO or a third entity would activate some sort of load limiting device. So their consumer would only be allowed to consume up to the level of contracted capacity. Now, this has certain implementation challenges and questions for sure. Maybe it's not a model suitable to all consumers. For certain consumers, they would maybe need a mandatory minimum level of contracted capacity and other practicalities. Of course, it requires smart metering and other conditions. But the advantage of this model would be to move from a system where we have a centralized determination of the level of adequacy for all consumers to a system where at least part of the consumers choose, if they wish, their level of adequacy of security of supply, because they believe that by choosing a lower level, they can still ensure their adequate comfort or production, if in case of industrial customers, and gain by this model rather than paying the same level for everybody. And this model also has been already presented in the past. You can see the reference on the bottom. Another possible model we've discussed is capacity mechanism with flexibility requirements. So here the demand for capacity could be split in different components depending on the specific flexibility requirements which would be put in the eligibility requirements for the capacity providers. So this could be split, for instance, to base load, then ramping or flexible capacity providers, and then peaking units, whether it's generation or demand. And by doing so, we could possibly lower the overall amount of capacity contracted instead going for capacity providers which have specific performance, so giving an investment signals via the capacity markets to more flexible technologies, and overall possibly achieve the same level of adequacy at a lower cost. Now, a question that is being debated lately and probably continue to be debated around adequacy in market design is about scarcity pricing. We hear a lot this concept. Maybe people have different views and ideas of what this really is. And we've seen emerging in European legislation recently, first in the electricity balancing guidelines, and then in electricity regulation, different articles. So the shorted pricing function there is mentioned. It's not concretely defined, and there is an optionality possibility to implement it rather than an obligation. So I think it would be interesting to understand better when and how it should be implemented. And maybe the first thing we could do is looking at the US markets, where they have implemented this so-called operational reserve demand curve. I hope most of you are familiar with it, but in a nutshell, the concept is that there's a price adder added to the imbalance pricing when the reserve volumes fall within a certain threshold, and this can push the demand curve up to a level of value of loss load. So by doing this, basically you give a extra pricing incentive for flexible resources, and it can lead to more frequent and predictable price spikes. And this is implemented not only in ERCOT, which is one of the few or the only market design in US without capacity mechanism, but is also in PJM, CAISO, New England ISO, and others. So in addition to capacity mechanism. So while we see some clear objectives and at least the theoretical advantage of this mechanism, there's some question on whether what will happen between the balancing time frame and the intraday and day-ahead market. So will this more frequent price spikes back propagate, and so send clear investment signals? And connected to this, will they be complementary to capacity mechanism, or will this incentives for flexibility also be decisive for adequacy? And then also a question about public and political acceptability of such high and frequent price spikes, which at least in certain countries may not be so obvious. Now, of course, when we talk about capacity mechanism and investment signals and adequacy, we cannot forget renewables. And I see some questions are already coming in regarding these topics. So the question, one of the key questions is, how will renewables be financed in the future with the wholesale average prices going down? Of course, they could rely a bit on the ancillary services markets, but will they still need support, or would they need more support? We're seeing some auctions for offshore wind at zero support, but that we know depends also on a number of other factors, such as the cost of grid connection. So it's a question we are debating whether we will see kind of cannibalization effect. So the more RES you put in the system, the lower the wholesale prices, and so the more need for support, or will maybe more flexible demand shift this balance. And in any case, in case of we need to continue with support schemes, which are the ones who interact better with energy markets that facilitate participation to the balancing market, something that's been mentioned earlier. Should we need some locational element to better coordinate RES development of grid capabilities? I think we're seeing some examples in some countries also to even out maybe the distribution of renewables investment in countries. And how do we incentivize the emergence of PPAs? This is maybe more a regulatory question than a market design one, but we understand it's something very important for for REST developers. And last but not least, capacity mechanism are, of course, an element where renewables developers, producers also look at. So they must be open to REST participation, of course, but it's not so straightforward how can they be considered. So how to establish their derating factor, and then the interaction between the capacity mechanism and the support scheme they may be getting at the same time. Last slide is about ancillary services. So in a future with more complex power flows, more instability as we see more smaller resources at different voltage level and less conventional resources, we see an emergence of system needs, which we have also seen in the power system needs in the T1DP 2020. So a number of these services will become more scarce and more valuable. So from a TSO perspective, we are asking ourselves, how can we make sure that the system has enough of this? And of course, the first option could be to simply establish markets and procure them. For instance, balancing, that's the clearest example. Possibly some of the non-frequency ancillary services could create markets of that for that, but it's not, again, so straightforward. So in case the market does not deliver timely enough or efficiently enough, there could be other alternatives, such as more regulated option, which also the Clean Energy Package recognizes. And last chart on the slide is just to say, I mean, don't take the chart with the division of the bars as something too scientific. It's just to say that in the future, we think that the share of revenues that producers or even demand response will gain from ancillary services markets will be bigger. So there's certainly space for important investment signals in that market, maybe new products that need to be developed. And that's it for this section, which means we can launch the last poll before going to the stakeholders' reaction. So I'll leave the poll open and we can move to the first speaker. We included the stakeholders in alphabetical order, so we will start with Acer. Françoise, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Can you see me and hear me well? Yes?
Yes, we can.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. First of all, thank you for offering to share our views during this seminar. I'll try to highlight a few points where we deem this point should be maybe the focus, or at least should be very important in light of the upcoming transition. The first one, and probably the most important one, is that, and as was mentioned in the slides earlier on, markets should align with physics as much as possible to ensure price formation which reflects system-wide costs. And here this means first that prices should be well formed in time and space, and locational aspects will play a crucial role. Ideally, we should have bidding zones which, for example, reflect structural network congestions so that they lead to efficient price formation. If we're unable to go for this route, we may have to explore alternatives such as nodal markets, for example. Another aspect on price formation, which is very important, relates to the various time frames and services. We think it is very important to better coordinate, for example, ancillary services and energy markets to ensure that the prices of one are reflected in the other so that prices are fully consistent. We also need to investigate further what to do to make the market more complete. For example, to have longer time frames for forward markets, how to ensure liquidity there, and how to ensure that these markets are maybe more flexible and more resilient with respect to potential changes in market structure, for example, through hub prices for forward markets. At the same time, ensuring an EU-wide optimization is crucial to ensure that we harness the benefit of mutual interdependency, diversity in the generation fleet, storage potential, and so on. But given that initiatives may progress at different paces in the different member states or regions, it will be crucial to ensure interoperability so that, for example, if one member state goes to nodal early on, the market should still properly function and ensure a desirable outcome during the transition period. Now, moving to technologies which will come increasingly to the market, and first to renewables. Here, there are two aspects I'd like to point out. We need to ensure efficient operations and investments related to renewables. With respect to investments, of course, if we have good price signals, this will help drive renewables where and when they are most valuable. But we may also need additional ad hoc arrangements, for example, possibly related to offshore wind, to ensure that we also lead to efficient outcomes there. With respect to operations, of course, as much as possible, we should try to ensure that all technologies have a behavior which is aligned with the short-run marginal cost. So this is also something to keep in mind with respect to renewables support scheme. But renewables are hardly the only new entrants. We also may have demand response, storage, and so on. And for these technologies to really contribute and to enable to decrease costs in some aspects, we need to ensure a level playing field and technology neutrality in everything we do, from, say, various balancing markets to all the way to investments, maybe when considering, for example, potential complementarity or competition between network and other technologies. In this respect, the role of TSOs and DSOs will be crucial, and we will have even more to ensure the role of market facilitator for these entities to ensure that the market functions properly within the limits of the physics. To deliver on all this, we will need a legal framework which works well. And here I would like to plea that all stakeholders participate to the forthcoming amendments of some regulations to ensure that they address the needs of all stakeholders and that they pave the way to an efficient and secure energy transition. That's it for the main aspects from our side. One point maybe to avoid to conclude relates to new markets. As much as possible, if existing markets can provide adequate signals, for example, regarding to some flexibility services, it may be better to keep the existing markets and to improve them rather than to create new markets, which may increase complexity, and may create even more of an administrative burden for market participants. That's it from my side. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Francois. We can now move to the next speaker, who is Jan from the European Commission, DG Ener.
Hello, everyone. Yes, video works perfect. So many thanks for the invite. I think it's a very interesting discussion, very interesting topics, and a nice presentation as well. I think generally that shouldn't be much of a surprise. I am, and I think also the Commission as a whole is very much in line with the thinking that was presented. I mean, it's clear that the clean energy package implementation is the basis, it's key. And from that, evolution is rather what we are currently having in mind rather than revolution. Stronger locational signals, I fully agree with Francois there. That's really an important challenge already right now, and it will become more and more important in the future. And there we of course have a challenge to maintain liquidity and to get more precise locational signals, and we have to look how to align the market better with physics while keeping the market alive. Let's say questions where it would be nice to dig deeper, however, that's not only the points where we fully align, because also it's important that you kind of keep looking at things which we may be forgetting in the debate. And there, indeed, I think it's important to highlight the forward capacity and the forward markets, because as you rightly said, they have evolved much less than the whole short-term markets, but still many investments happen based on forward prices, and forward prices are still very much relevant for the investment signal part. So if we want to have market-driven investments, we need to make sure that the forward markets are also providing the right signals, which includes, again, for example, locational signals, and how to ensure liquidity there and ensure more correct price signals in this domain. That would be very interesting for me. Other than that, of course, reducing complexity of the market, as just Francois said, with not introducing new markets, but rather trying to get the current markets to function better. And that may mean, for example, reducing or simplifying existing products is always very welcome. In particular, when we get more and more market players, already complexity of the whole system increases. So if then also the market rules are extremely complex, that's not always helpful. And I know that the Commission is not always helpful in that regard, but that's everybody tries to implement his own ideas, of course. On congestion management, I very much appreciate that it's not an all or nothing approach which you present. And I think that's also kind of a political fallacy into which some of the debates have slid over the last years, that it's either the perfect bidding zone or nothing. It's important that we look at things in between. And the optimal solution will depend on how fast we are with network development. I mean, the closer we are to a pure zonal model, I think that the easier it is both from a regulatory perspective and for the market. And that requires lots of network development to come online in time. The bigger delays get, the more we have to think about what to amend and how to amend things. But of course, I fully agree that a nodal model before 2030, I don't see it personally. I mean, that's clear. On capacity mechanisms, one point which was not, I mean, it was mentioned on the sidelines, but more on the last slide, seeing that capacity revenue will become perhaps even smaller than ancillary service revenue. One important point from a legal perspective is to actually be able to delineate those two, because we have clear rules on capacity mechanisms. We have much less clear rules on many of the ancillary services which are there. And therefore, there's a very complex legal but also regulatory discussion on how to actually separate some of the ancillary services from the capacity mechanism rules. How does that work with interoperability schemes, for all those things? And this debate will become bigger and more important financially and more complex the more we have flexibility elements in the capacity mechanism, which I think are very important, because of course pure baseload will less and less be really what's missing in the system, and therefore having some flexibility elements in capacity mechanisms will become perhaps even the norm, if you have a capacity mechanism, that is. And in such a circumstance, of course, delineating this from ancillary services in the classic sense, which is a bit more vague as a term, perhaps is going to be challenging. So I think that's the main elements. As I said, very nice presentation. I think that it summarizes many of the questions we have to ask ourselves very well, and of course the answers we'll have to keep looking. Many thanks.
Thank you very much, Jan, for the useful feedback. We now move to IFET, Jérôme.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you very much, Marco and the other speakers. So I'd first like to thank ENTSO-E warmly for this presentation. I think it's a very timely one, and we really welcome this forward-looking approach to evolutions of market design in general. And for us, it's indeed very important to keep this reflection going, to make sure it informs the future legislative evolutions, to keep the debate open in order to be able to build consensus among TSOs, among market participants, decision makers, etc. But one thing also is make sure at some point we make firm recommendations as well, and that's where we think ENTSO-E can have its own voice. We should hear it more in the debates. Sometimes away also from individual TSO interest that may be there. So with that, if we go into some of the specifics of what you presented, I think there are some very interesting reflections on market design evolutions. And maybe their suggestion would be to better identify goals. For us, like, what is the objective of all this is to have efficient, open, and competitive markets in Europe. And a few examples around that where we could refocus a little bit the thinking that I'm missing a little bit in the beginning of the presentation, really objectives and goals when you seem to present rather practical tools in terms of evolution of the market model. Be it the day ahead and intraday, like blurring of lines or increasing the number of intraday auctions, these kind of things. We really need to ask ourselves, so what are we doing this for? And is that the right solution? Rather than, I would say, jumping on things that may be appealing, but that may not conduce to greater, more efficient, more open, more competitive markets. On balancing, I think one of the most important elements, and there's a lot of thinking going on. There's a lot of evolutions that are ongoing on this topic. It's important that we keep on furthering like true cooperation between TSOs and creating a level playing field for market participants on the BSP side, but also on the BRP side. And for that, I think there are elements of the current legislative framework that will not help us get further until we get true harmonization, for instance, of imbalanced settlement principles, pricing, volumes, etc. We probably won't be able to go any further than where we are. So that's an important step to keep in mind to be able to go ahead in market design evolutions. And then forward markets, very happy that that forward markets were not forgotten. They're still the most important part of the market for market participants. And there again, let's go back to the basics. We're talking about capacity, availability in the forward markets. Let's make sure that all TSO issue forward transmission rights, that they listen to market participants calling for that where there are no transmission rights available. Thoughts about forward capacity allocation on a flow-based methodology. That's also very interesting, but let's make sure we get the right tools, the right assumptions, sturdy common grid models, etc. in place. On congestion management, I would say just a few words. Very happy that we're getting out of the dogmatic zonal versus nodal debates. It's for us, congestion management should work whichever bidding zone delineation or whichever model we have. So it's important to think outside the box, and solutions in between may exist indeed. And so we are happy to start having this conversation, that it stays in the open, because there's a lot of questions around that. Can congestion management actually be a market? What are the roles and responsibilities? We heard about financing and how that may shift or redistribute who finances congestion management. All this really needs to be properly discussed so that when ENTSO-E comes up with a recommendation, for instance, we don't get any backlash either from market participants or national governments or certain NRAs, etc. So it needs to be a consensus position, I would say. And with that, I would warn against certain pre-established views around, for instance, like certain zonal model, certain nodal model, or the need for a nodal approach in certain countries, for instance. Let's make sure we all work together to find consensus-based decisions that work everywhere. This is very important, because if this is to be part of a greater internal energy market, the solutions need to work for everyone. And I'll close with capacity mechanisms and resource adequacy. not spending much time on this. Just want to make sure that this whole debate is like taken back to the basics of what the clean energy package says, and indeed is like always the need to enhance the energy markets before thinking about capacity mechanisms. So I would encourage there the European Commissions, but also individual regulators, for instance, to make sure that wherever those mechanisms are put in place or being considered, that there is an improvement on price signals, because those are like the energy market price signal, because those are the ones that may replace or reduce the need for a capacity mechanism. And this is really important that we make sure that capacity mechanisms are restricted to like what they're really needed for, and what they're used for. So with that, I'll close. Thanks again for ENTSO-E to like having started this debate, and we look forward to being part of it.
Thank you very much, Jérôme. And we can now move to the next speaker, Euroelectric, Alfred Hoffmann, please.
Yes, hello, good afternoon. Do you understand me?
Yes, we hear you.
Hope so. Yeah, great, thanks. Okay, and thanks for inviting me also to this very interesting webinar. Highly appreciated, and I can just resonate what has been mentioned before. Out of my view, all of the relevant topics being debated across Europe, also within the country associations, are reflected in the material. So well done from an ENTSO-E perspective, for sure. And just reviewing most of it, was what has been mentioned. I think there are a couple of things which are, so to speak, low-hanging fruits, like existence of a secondary market for certain financial instruments. For sure, that makes sense. So I would rather like to focus on what I believe are the bigger things we have to focus on now going forward, and which certainly also needs some additional analysis going forward. Generally and in principle, I and we as Euroelectric appreciate the general market-based approach. All kind of market-based mechanisms, we believe, are still the best instrument, best method to lead to an efficient overall energy system, supply system. For sure, we would also appreciate, and I would say as much as possible, harmonized approach all over Europe, as for sure we shouldn't forget that all kind of country zone specific solution adds to the complexity the different market participants have to cope with on the European market. And that's certainly true both for generators, grid operators, but especially also for customers who are active across all our countries. So to the extent possible, aiming for a harmonized solution would be highly preferred. On the other hand, what we've also noticed, just thinking back about all the discussions we had about the energy-only market and the capacity markets before, it certainly takes some time to also conclude on the best system going forward. And sometimes it's even becoming very academic and theoretical. So allowing different member states to try a new approach is most probably the best way forward. So, and then allowing ourselves also to fail fast on some of the solutions which might prove not to be the best one going forward. So that's the kind of balance we need to strike, but it also, based on what we've now seen over the last decade, 2 decades, has been proven to be the right concept. aim for a harmonized solution, but allow also for a certain degree of diversity. And then thinking about the big things, for sure, all kind of real-time improvement, market improvements is something we have to deal with going forward. We have more short-term flexibility or variability of the infeed of the renewables into the systems. There are a lot of solutions being available also to deal with that, to react on that, to benefit from that, and that's what we certainly have to develop the markets into. I think it also makes sense to integrate the balancing markets, as mentioned, in order to ease the, in a way, bidding decision, dispatch decision between the different markets. And I would even like to go one step further, because the more we talk about market integration, we certainly shouldn't forget still the natural gas markets, or being it the hydrogen markets at a later stage. Keeping in mind that parts of the demand response will be based on potential electrolyzers, but also parts of the generation capacity as of today and for the next decades to come will be gas-fired assets. Further integration and also real-time integration of the bidding on the gas markets or hydrogen markets, as well the power markets, certainly would make sense out of my view. The third biggest thing for sure is the nodal pricing. We already heard earlier, it's rather unlikely to have an overall nodal price system up until 2030. I would say we for sure do not even know whether this would be the preferred market design model going forward. But allowing different TSOs, different countries to apply such a model going forward certainly makes sense. However, we should do so just in case we have a real good comfort that this will provide a better solution than the zonal model. And similar to what I just mentioned earlier on the capacity markets, we have to make sure, and that's one of our core prerequisites also from a electric perspective, to have a proper coexistence of those markets, and to have a proper cross-border participation opportunity also into those markets. So that's going to be very important going forward. And then last but not least, whenever we talk about an efficient energy-only market, we talk about proper investment signals going forward. We also shouldn't forget that even just, let's say, partly related to the market design as such, but the huge variety of different taxes, levies, and also levies, and also tariffs also have an impact on the way we are dispatching the assets within our industry, and also the way we are actually taking an investment decision for some of our assets. So just also aiming to come up with a proper and to the extent possible harmonized approach when it comes to those elements, which certainly has an impact on the profitability of the assets, also should be forgotten. So that's the main things from my perspective, and thanks a lot. Handing over to the next panelist.
Thanks a lot. We move to the next speaker from Europex, Richard Nielsen.
Yes, hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, very good. I'm happy to give some first comments. And as I begin, I would like to first again show appreciation for ENTSO-E for having provided this framework. Also looking forward to the next couple of days and the conclusions, and to see where where and how the next steps will be. So on the general level, thankful for this opportunity. It's timely and good that we can have a fruitful discussion among stakeholders and authorities on the ways forward. So that's first. Second, I would like to say is that in terms of high level, there are definitely some ideas and proposals that we have clear sympathy and would like to discuss further. And as some have said, but I would maybe make a slight tweak to that, is of course that as the power system, renewables, the focus on making a climate workable system and going forward, and everything else that changed technology-wise and so, it is obvious that markets have to evolve and develop in accordance to that. But whether that is to be done, as was pointed out also from Jerome from EFET, it's a bit of a chicken and egg problem here. That whether the facilitations of market should be to facilitate for the grid or for the wider. I would say that probably both the grid needs to evolve according to the needs and markets need to evolve. So that's, but in general, of course, as being an association that represents market operators trading in various types of different markets, of course, we are in the business of providing businesses, trading and services that fits with the needs of the system and the customers. So on that, I'll jump into some high-level first recognitions or reflections on the specifics. So first section on the wholesale markets. A few things that are worthy to mention. Of course, we recognize the need to have some innovation, but there is already, it should not be forgotten that there is innovation ongoing, for example, in intraday markets, in addition to day-ahead and forward markets, to work and find ways of integrating renewables and ability to trade closer to delivery, that there is an involvement through market-based and other based mechanisms, that there is not trials and option put it forward on local flexibility markets. That, by the way, was something which I think probably was in the overall content, but it wasn't visible so much that we perhaps would have liked. But we think that it's important that local flexibility markets is one key aspect to be considered as well in this whole debate, and not least also that the way that it over time can be connected to the larger wholesale markets in one way or another. We also, of course, recognize and of course also work along that, both due to regulatory requirements, but also because of the needs, again, being so that shorter time granularity of products should be enabled. Bid sizes, I would consider probably are adequately small, but if they're not, that is obviously something that in specific markets probably can be adjusted. So of course, again, if the real needs are really there, I wouldn't think that the bid size per se would be a barrier for aggregations of local customers or larger customers. In terms of the design of combining day and intraday, I think there needs to be much more discussion on that. We have coming in the next few years intraday auctions that are to be pan-European. There are 3 per day. Of course, that can be a very valid point to see how those will work efficiently and what they can provide in addition to intraday continuous trading going on and in complementing day-ahead markets and longer markets, forward trading in long products as well. So I think one needs to see a little bit more evolutions before one can make judgment on how far you can combine different markets. Likewise, one thing that we noted is of course that we are very focused also on providing as much flexibility and opportunity for trading in the various markets that the different changes are involved. But of course, complexity needs to be kept at a level that it is manageable. And so on the general level, we agree that they can be looked upon on that. But we also recognize a little bit of a concern in this aspect that the TSOs and ENTSO-E seem to be, on the one hand, suggesting a reduction of complexity in traded markets like day ahead and intraday, but at the same time wanting to introduce additional complexities such as co-optimization and so on. That perhaps is worth merits as well to look at complexities not just coming from trading products but also from other aspects as well. I think that what Jerome also again said is quite valid, is that one has to ask the question, what are we to solve in this particular mechanism and the next? And perhaps that's one of the major things to look upon. What are we solving here and what can we solve later or earlier? And perhaps then that is a way to reduce perhaps some complexities. And those complexities can be trading products or they can be grid-related elements. Where are those best handled? I need to move on, I know. On the second one, I think that on congestion management spatial granularity, clearly we recognize there is not an automatic silver bullet on what is the right choice. We're also happy to see there is some opening on the discussions here. But at least the clear assessment from us now and also earlier has been that the primary developments should still be built around a zonal design. Surely a zonal design can be somewhat tweaked, but that should be the basis for further evolvements in our assessment currently. Then we also think that combined with local flexibility markets can be a good way of finding also some locational signals, more local signals needed in those local type arrangements. Whereas a good zonal design can be quite workable for other wholesale markets and long-term markets. I need to move into number 3, the resource adequacy and capacity mechanisms. We are generally supportive of the idea to enhance the energy-only market, but basically build, and that's very important, the general thing that we should build around the concept of energy-only markets. However, it can be where needed and limited in scope, and also that they should be market-based capacity mechanisms. So of course they can be complementary, but they should be limited to their scope, and over time, ideally, they should be not necessary, of course, but quite recognizable that they may be needed for some period in time forward in some countries and regions. But mainly building on an energy-only market is our starting point. Then we would also like to say that we definitely acknowledge technical needs and for ancillary services, and then an greater importance. But at the same time, we find that the markets, if framework conditions can be kept as they are or even improved for day ahead, intraday, and forward markets, that there's a lot of room for more activities down there that can be efficient of an overall perspective. So basically not move everything into ancillary services and balancing, because that can be quite challenging over time. In terms of scarcity, of course, we are in the business of not setting limits as such. There are technical boundaries that needs to be in the various organized markets, but not more than that. But in general, we are fine, but not perhaps the design of the scarcity pricing that was presented needs further debate whether anything of that sort could be feasible in Europe. We are somewhat skeptical, but the principle of having prices being able to fluctuate, being high or very low, it's part of an ingrained energy owner market. final high-level message would be that we find that it's key that we can build around energy-only markets, that we can facilitate participants in open markets, and through that also, of course, further activity by market participants in ancillary services and balancing. But first, that they can be active in the markets where prices are formed. And we can also see that in the medium term, there are many examples. We only take three and I definitely will finish. Examples of what we can done in the short term. For example, transparency could be enhanced in balancing markets to enable signals to come out earlier from the balancing markets to make parties able to react to them. There could be even improvements in facilitation of participation of actors, and that can be done, for example, through the balancing responsible agreements, and also through making it easier for new types of entrants like aggregators, DSR, storage, etc., to participate. Finally, we think it's important to see what can be done to extend trading, short-term trading locally and cross-border. But that's in a big debate in itself. But it's crucial that markets can have the best opportunities to trade when it's most needed. So with that too long input, I'll stop. Thank you.
Thank you, Rickard. Quickly move to the last two speakers as we are running a bit behind schedule, and we just want to give enough time for the Q&A. So Peter Kleis from IFIC.
Okay, thank you very much. Hope you can hear me. I'll be as brief as possible, and forgive me if I'm a bit direct and provocative by times. It's fully intentional. Thank you. First thing, I fully agree, and I think I'm not the only one, that maybe the first priority is to fully implement the clean energy package and make sure that measures in there are correctly implemented in all member states. I think you have to stop changing and amending rules that have not even yet been implemented by all. And I think it's very important to give some stability to the system and make sure that everybody has some clarity on what rules are applicable in what time frame. Then on the proposals, and I'm very grateful to ENTSO-E for putting these proposals on the table on market design. I just will come in several times on where you put the customer at the center or where you don't do that. So this is some criticism on your subtitle and your sub target of putting the customer at the center. The first example is where you want to bring the clearing of the markets closer to real time, and I fully understand why, but this is not in the interest of the end consumer, or not necessarily in the interest of the end consumer. For instance, if you have demand response, if you have some flexibility in an industrial process, it is not 15 minutes before real time that you will be able to bring that to the system. You need some time to plan and to adapt your production and the way of off-taking or consuming in your system. So I understand why you do that, but please let's discuss, because it is not necessarily in the interest of the end consumer. Second example, I saw a nice slide on the transmission capacity forward markets, very interesting, but the slide says stakeholders may need more detailed products for transmission capacity in the forward markets. Well, please ask us, please let's discuss, instead of putting on a slide that they may need that. I'm not saying we don't need that, but we haven't discussed this with you, so let's discuss whether we need some block bits or some weekend products. I'd be surprised to see may need that in the slides. Nodal pricing, I see a lot of arguments against nodal pricing, and I'm not saying that I'm in favor of nodal pricing. I'm just saying that in the list of arguments that you give why you don't like nodal pricing, none is a customer related argument. It's all TSO or political or complexity linked arguments. So don't say that not looking into the possibilities of nodal pricing is a priority or a wish, or is putting the customer at the center of the system. This is not the case. We haven't even discussed this as far as I'm concerned. Capacity remuneration and resource adequacy, 2 comments, and that's it. Scarcity pricing, very interesting route, but if there is an adder to be added to the price in order to show that there is a lack of adequacy or a shortage coming up, well, then maybe we have to work on the level of price that you can have in the energy-only market itself, rather than adding something to it. So we are not, again, fundamentally opposed to scarcity pricing, but it needs discussion, and I don't think it's in the interest of the customer, again, to add something to the price, because there's a possibility of scarcity in the future. So let's discuss that. And then last one, and maybe one of the most important ones also, I challenge you to find customers that want to buy capacity. I know some companies are interested in having capacity, but when I buy a bread, I'm not interested in the baking capacity of the baker. When I buy a car, I'm not interested in the assembly capacity of the car manufacturer. And when I buy electricity, I'm not really interested in the capacity of the one who is supplying that to me. I buy capacity, I buy energy, and I think I am entitled to trust that the one who sells me the energy is capable of producing it when I want to consume it. And I think it's turning around the responsibilities in the market and the roles in the market. Having the capacity to supply someone with what you have sold him is a responsibility of the supplier, not of the customer. So this also we need to discuss. Again, fundamentally, we are not opposed to capacity and remuneration mechanisms, but if you want to introduce them, you have to look at the whole picture and not just introducing them as a means of de-risking assets for suppliers or generators. And then, by the way, maybe we will also have to review other elements of market design, because I don't see why in a market with an EOM plus a capacity remuneration mechanism, you need to make sure that there is an inframarginal rent for producers. So then also let's stop clearing. Let's also stop basing the energy-only markets on paid as cleared principles. Thank you very much. As I said, maybe a bit provocative, but this is just to stimulate the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. That's indeed stimulating further remarks. And we move now to other consumers to see if they have same or different views. So Andres from Smarten.
Yes, thank you very much for giving us this opportunity to comment and for the very interesting presentations. I will skip some of the topics that I wanted to raise because indeed Europex and now EFIE also mentioned them already. But I want to go into a bit of detail on some of the aspects that we thought were important to not lose focus on while we have this discussion on market design. So first, on wholesale markets, we have to keep in mind that we need to create this environment where everybody can participate, and that it is that on the one side the system operators receive the services that they need, but also that the market participant receives the correct signals and business, especially regarding your business opportunities, to participate into those markets that we want to create. And in that regard, I missed some of the possible solutions in the presentation, or aspects that we think we need to focus on. For example, I'm thinking here of the possibility of stacking of services. So you mentioned shorter products. You mentioned minimum bid sizes to adapt them, but we also have to look into how we facilitate that the flexibility provider can make the most out of the flexibility that they have, right? It's most of the times it makes or breaks the business case for them if they can diversify the options and to really sure that they take advantage of the flexibility available and that it doesn't go to waste. So in that regard, I think that's an important topic, that we allow service providers to bid into different products. It's not only about wholesale markets at the same time with the same load, and in this way, if a bid is not selected for one product, it can go into the next one, as long as there's no conflict. In that regard, also on the product simplification, we need a clear, neutral product design. That is, for example, I'm thinking here of one very concrete example on ramping. That we've seen that for certain products, they are still designed with traditional generation in mind, which puts flexibility at a disadvantage. And those kinds of things we need to iron out and to make sure that everybody actually has a fair opportunity to participate. And on wholesale markets, on the first block also, we discussed we haven't really discussed the structural issues in the grid. We don't think that we should rely exclusively on ancillary services, for example, to solve what many times are structural issues. I don't know if this is the perfect, or if this is the webinar more better suited for this topic, but we've seen this issue already on the ENTSO-E report on the significant frequency deviations from 2019. So I think it is important that we address structural problems in parallel to development of different market products and flexibility services. Otherwise, we can see that products that are actually used inefficiently, or that are used for other purposes that they were originally designed for, as we can see actually now with FCR happening many times. And then fully supporting what Richard from Europex was saying before, that we cannot lose the focus also on local flexibility markets and how they will interact with on the TSO level. Yeah. Then on the second block on congestion management, I will only say that that we need increased transparency on local congestions, and that is something that links with my previous point. Make it known to market parties where these are happening and what the system needs. I think it's the only way, from what we've seen, that service providers can properly assess and know where to invest and where the business opportunities lie, and to further develop. And then briefly on the third block on capacity mechanisms. So on our position or our view is that capacity mechanisms, they should be mainly used if they're fully market-based, and if fully market-based capacity products, they're not available or they're not possible, and only after a thorough adequacy assessment that takes into account flexibility services and factoring in, of course, the benefits that they can provide to the system. So the capacity mechanisms should be market-wide and reward the contribution of all resources to security of supply. And it should be also transparent and monitored to ensure the establishment of clearly defined capacity evaluation. So just to say that product requirements should be based on the system needs and not on the technologies that are providing them. So this is very important whenever we also try to decide on the capacity mechanism. And in any case, they should be built with a time horizon in mind, and keep in mind that we will be reassessing them or adapting them to new situations. And then finally on scarcity pricing, there I didn't agree that much with other speakers. I think it is quite indispensable for customers to be able to correctly value the benefits that flexibility bring to the system. And they are also a good sign of an efficient and working market. Market prices should reflect the real value of electricity at any given moment, and it should reflect the congestions. So scarcity prices, we think they should be possible, and the full value of balancing costs should be reflected in electricity prices. And just a point to add on public acceptability of that, it is important to note, I think, that scarcity prices do not necessarily translate into a price peak for consumers. Energy users should be able to make their own choices finally regarding the level of risk management provided to them by the electricity retailer or by any other service provider. So it is ultimately their choice, and not it shouldn't be imposed. But it is important that the prices reflect the current situation, or as it was said, the physics of the grid. And then just one final point, what I saw a bit missing, and this goes a bit into what Richard said. We were missing a bit of a more integrated perspective with local flexibility markets. The vision presented here is for 2030, but it is not addressing the possibility of local flexibility markets and how they would interact with TSO markets. And one of our asks is that for local flex markets is to be effective, is that they have products that are compatible with different markets. And for that, we need to enable broad flexibility markets that include TSOs, DSOs, and other market parties that can compete for these resources. And this can be achieved through one or multiple market platforms on which users of flexibility procure what they need, while flexibility providers should have access to all of them. And for that, we do still need some extra additional work between TSOs, DSOs, and I think we shouldn't be discounting this problem. And I think that is everything that I wanted to add, and I hope that was brief enough. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We are running a bit behind schedule, and thanks for the speakers who have to wait at the end of the queue, especially Daniel. We will need to shorten the questions and possibly the conclusions. We may need a few minutes after 4 p.m. If you have to leave, you can leave, but for the concluding remarks, yeah, we will need a few minutes more. We'll try to take at least 2 questions. So please, Daniel.
Thanks a lot, Marco, and we very much welcome the initiative that you have launched with this. I think it's a very important exercise, and we very much look forward to engage further on this discussion. This is the beginning only. Try to keep it short. First of all, I want to focus on the congestion management. We very much agree with you that nodal will not be the end goal, but we need to look into how we bring more locational signals into the game. We will definitely like to explore a bit more the dispatch hubs and the local balancing designs, understand a bit better what will be the cost implications for all the grid users, and we think that in some particular cases where grid is not being developed as fast as it should, as Jan from the Commission mentioned, that we might look into those type of arrangements for the time being. I think also you need to look into the implementability of some of these market solutions, because they might look very good in paper, but it's very challenging to get them done. We've seen now with the implementation of the clean energy package how some of the provisions from the network codes, for instance, are being hard to implement with regards to data exchange as the system operational guidelines, and how you exchange information between TSOs and DSOs among them, and in order to improve the operation of the system. We also think that it's important to continue allowing for a split of balancing capacity and activation of energy bits, and so that will also enable some of the renewables and new assets to participate in balancing close to real time. Regarding to the wholesale markets, I think most of the comments mentioned make sense. We need to look at the goal of increasing number of intraday auctions, for instance, but we think we understand the reasoning behind. One thing that perhaps is missing on your slides are the get closer times, so getting this to closer to real time, and not forgetting the get closer times in cross-border markets, and making sure that these are as short as possible, but they are also aligned with the local gate closure times. Because if you have a local closure time which is shorter than the cross-border, and then all the trading will happen at the local level, and so you somehow neglect the cross-border trading. I agree with some of the comments mentioned before. We should try to reduce the complexity and the number of products which also will facilitate the market calculations and the algorithms, so that you can have a closer to real-time views of the system. On adequacy, I also agree with some of the points I think made by Jerome. We need to first enhance the energy-only market and to really look into the scarcity, as it has been just discussed, before we start entering into discussions about capacity markets and how this could potentially include flexibility or include other elements. I think we need to first enable the price signals for flexibility in the energy-only market. And eventually you might have to introduce a capacity market if you are lacking some capacity, but don't try to mix up all the different services under this market, because you are basically undermining the energy market. And this is something that we should avoid. There was also some comments mentioned about the distinction between ancillary services and capacity markets. I think they're very important ones, and we need to clear up what we're talking when we refer to ancillary services. There were some comments at the beginning of the presentation from ENTSO-E about the fact that renewables are not participating, perhaps because there is an interference with support schemes. But the most important element is that until now, there's been a lot of barriers to access these ancillary service markets. So we were not even allowed to pre-qualify to provide these services, which is obviously one of the main issues. We look into the Irish example as a one to follow in terms of bringing new products to the market and make them accessible for all players. Finally, on renewables support scheme, this has not been discussed much by the previous speakers, but you have some provocative suggestions there, whether we should be moving into capacity auctions. I think there is a very good question from the audience. Because some of your comments was like, we will move into a future where we don't have support for renewables. So what are your assumptions behind that renewables could be financed without any particular revenue stabilization? Here we are supporting two-sided contracts for difference, which we don't really call it that subsidy, but it's actually a kind of a way to hedge a bit the prices. And we think that if you design them well enough, you don't interfere with short-term market dispatch signals, so that renewable players can also participate actively and positively to the development of the short-term markets. I'll leave it there for the moment. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Daniel. I apologize for the delay. We'll need to cut short the questions, but maybe we can take a couple of them. So maybe we could start with the one that Daniel just mentioned, or the group of the two asked by Philip Alexander regarding new system and what should be priced with the energy or capacity. So maybe Bruno, you want to answer this? I can read it loud. Should we move into a system where we put a price on scarcity when there is no wind and solar, rather than when there is abundant and cheapest train? Let's move away from energy to capacity pricing. Bruno, you may need to unmute yourself. Maybe let's take another one in the meantime.
Yeah, sorry about that.
Oh, you're here, sorry.
Yeah, so this, yeah, sorry about that. Interesting question. Should we do that? Well, at first sight, you should say, yeah, this should be interesting, but unfortunately, no. I do think that the price of consuming is everything. So this energy price will tell us when to consume, when to produce, and I think it's of the utmost importance that we base our system, all of our actions on the price. The only thing is we got to get the price right, and this is why we need improvements to that. So we do believe that the energy price in the different timeframes is the basis for further evolutions.
Thank you, Bruno. I was showing the results of the poll to save a bit of time. We can take maybe one more question on balancing asked by Paul. So will ENTSO-E accommodate a discussion to agree a common view on balancing? We need to clarify the interaction between TSOs and BRPs. I think Zoltan volunteered to take that.
Yes, Marco, thank you, and good afternoon, everyone. I'm Zoltan Gyulai. I haven't been speaking today, head of market section at the Secretariat. And I thank you very much, Paul, for the question. Indeed, it's a very good one. I understand that today the TSOs ensure the power balance, while the energy balance is being ensured by the balance circle responsible parties. And the link between these two, the power balance and the energy balance, is the length of the imbalance periods and the imbalance pricing and the related rules. The shorter the imbalance period, the less possibility to optimize. We also assume that the dimensions of the traded products give a sort of natural balance between the shape of the curve and the area below it. That means the power balance and the energy balance. Now, we also recognize that the harmonization of these imbalance rules across the borders under the current regulatory regime leaves some room for improvement, as pointed out by Effet and Jérôme correctly. I think we should engage and take a closer look at this and see how far we can go in harmonizing the pricing and the length of imbalance harmonization periods. I assume that revisiting the role of active system management isn't really in scope today, but I would like to just mention that tomorrow there is a next step of our webinars, which will address the flexibility issues. I guess this is best placed to be addressed there. So thanks, that would be my answer.
Thank you, Zoltan. I'm sorry we don't have more time for the questions, but we'll try to answer to them in writing, and I'm sure we'll get back to that also in the next year with our future events on market design and stakeholder webinar. So I let you the floor to conclude, Zoltan, and I'll just leave on the screen the last poll, which shows a bit the interest of stakeholders on the different areas.
Thank you, Marco, and I also turned on my camera in case you wondered how I look. So first of all, I would like to thank for all of you for your time and attention. It's record-breaking numbers of attendance we have seen today. A special thanks goes to our speakers for their contributions. I would like to say well done and thank you to Konrad, Bruno, Gerard, Marco, Francois, Jan, Jérôme, Ricard, Alfred, Daniel, Anders, and Peter. So thanks a lot, guys. As said earlier, we are not really after changing the current regulatory framework. We don't really want to interfere with the ongoing implementation of clean energy package, but we are trying to look further ahead and anticipate further policy discussions. Our overall objective was correspondingly is to trigger a debate on possible concrete options for 2030, and we have seen good debates on a few points. I've just noted down some. Financing investments in a zero marginal cost environment, ensuring that markets and physics are aligned, coordination of balancing markets and preceding timeframes. These are all questions to be looked into in details. I guess we need to mention that all of your comments will be fed into the further works that we will carry out. So none of them is gonna go wasted, even if we didn't manage to answer all of it. We have also run a last poll which showed where we asked which are the fields where we should focus our works, and it came out that all aspects need to be worked on equally, namely congestion management, wholesale markets, and investment signals are equally important for further elaboration. About the next steps, I think Konrad explained at the beginning that we're gonna issue a discussion paper by the end of this year, beginning of next year, that would be elaborating on these ideas, which we will expect and ask kindly for your contributions and comments. Then once we have these comments, we are going to organize another round of webinars and workshops in hope of achieving something more concrete policy advice. Last but not least, please don't forget that there are seminars and webinars throughout this week. The next one is tomorrow, which is going to address the flexibility questions, and we are counting on your presence. Please do join us. Thank you.